Chapter 33. Sensei, you got that mission for Naruto? Jiraiya asked as he entered the Hokage's office. Yes, I have it here. Here isn't, Saratobi said as he finished looking over the mission requirements for the scroll in his hand before rolling it back up and handing it off to his disciple. It should keep him occupied until you get back, and the two accompanying him are seasoned Chunin as well. Not that I'm expecting trouble, but one can never be too careful. The mission itself was a simple one, a standard mission from the land of honey to help cull the numbers of honey badgers. The normally small creatures were known for their attitude and viciousness and resilience, but in the land of honey the long-lived ones often grew to a much larger size than typical, with some of them being as large as bears. Between a hide resistant to blades, a fierce attitude, and limbs large enough to crush bone with a swing, these larger ones often necessitated being eliminated before they could plunder the hives or harm the local population. That being said, normally only a couple would come out from hiding every year. This year was an exception. There had been at least a dozen sightings and 10 casualties, not to mention the number of beehives that got cleaned out by them could damage their economy in the long term if not stopped. Thanks, Jiraiya said, slipping it into a pocket. Then he noticed a weary look on the elderly shinobi's face. What's wrong? Not sleeping? There was a minor skirmish with shinobi from stone by the border that was repelled, he said. I believe they were prying to see if it was possible to take advantage of recent events. All in all, it's nothing too major or unsurprising from Inoki, but I'm hoping he won't press this further. Jiraiya found himself frowning pensively at that. It wasn't unexpected, but with the issue of dealing with sand and the fallout of sound could spread their forces thin from a military perspective. Do you think that it'll cause problems later on? Inoki is no fool, Hiruzen said. As long as the leaf remains strong and the matter with sand is dealt with quickly, he will not push his luck. After all, a prolonged conflict will only serve to leave his own borders open to an assault, given the past grievances the other villages have with his own. Their reputation among the major hidden villages was well earned for a reason after all. Virtually every alliance that they did turned sour as they backstabbed one village after another to the extent that should a war break out, they'd have enemies attacking them on every side. Then again, Cloud was no better things, and the only reason mist was less of a factor was because they were across sea and had more ground to cover if they wanted to attempt something. And that was only covering the major villages, not the minor ones like with Sound had proven. It only served as another reminder that, despite this supposing to be a time of peace, every nation was just looking for an opening. Then again, was the leaf better than them by a large margin? He'd done things that he wasn't proud of in the past. Things that wouldn't wash away, no matter how much time passed. Just about every shinobi involved in warfare had building grudges that would carry on. A hero in one village was dreaded in the other. He hated it. Jiraiya hated that from the perspective of a hidden village, every other village was an enemy in the grand scheme of things. Even while things were considerably better than they were in the past, they were still far off from a world of peace. Still, he had hoped that, by the time he was as old as his sensei, they would make some more headway. Pushing that aside, Jiraiya turned his attention to a more cheerful topic. Then that just leaves the subject of the masks that are in the ceiling R&D's possession. Yes. I've already discussed that with the necessary parties, he grumbled. You have made Miss Tsuda a very happy woman, for the record. She's looking forward to learning of what capabilities the rest of the masks have, as well as their origins if possible. That woman was occasionally far more enthusiastic than even Jiraiya was comfortable with, but she was the most qualified for the task. It's a shame that none of Kushina's ceiling ciphers or primers had survived the destruction of their home during the nine-tailed fox's rampage. She'd probably be a sealing master herself in due time, at least academically speaking. Practical use was a different story, and she seemed to prefer studying lost arts to recreate them rather than combat use. Then I'll go give this to Naruto and be on my way to Sand, Jiraiya said. That way we can sort this mess out once and for all. Hang tight until then. Be quick, Jiraiya. Leaving the office, after bidding his mentor farewell, he made headway to Naruto's apartment and knocked on the door. When the boy answered, Jiraiya noticed Naruto looked a bit slack with his eyes slightly droopy, and he had a bandage on his head. Now why do you look so tired? You're normally all but bouncing around. I tried to do what we practiced with Yang Chakra and spent all night working on it. Naruto covered his mouth as he yawned. It's really tiring since it uses a lot of stamina and takes a bit of time to boost myself up to it, plus I kind of overshot and hit a tree because I wasn't used to the sudden shift. It's a lot different from when I use the fox. That's probably because you're relying on your own chakra and instincts, while its chakra carries its influence and instincts. But if you get it down properly, it'll make you a lot faster and stronger without relying solely on the fox. He pulled out and handed over the mission scroll for him to take. Anyway, here's a mission from the old man. You leave out tomorrow for the land of honey. Awesome. Naruto said with a bright grin, even before he opened the scroll. My second mission is a Chunin. I bet it's something like infiltrating a hideout or something like that. It's nothing like that. You've still got less than a year under your belt, and outside of wartime we leave that sort of thing to more experienced candidates. Jiraiya then proceeded to give the overview of the mission in question, rehashing the discussion that he had with the old man. So it's not all that hard, but it gives you a chance to explore outside the village and learn about different types of missions firsthand. It sounds simple enough, Naruto said, less enthusiastic than before as he looked over the details. Still, second mission is a Chunin. I should buy some souvenirs to bring back for everyone else. You can get some gourmet honey snacks there for a decent price if you know where to look, Jiraiya said sagely. In my travels, I've found that many women appreciate sweets, and their honey-soaked lemon slices, honey cake, and honey rice crackers were excellent gifts. Sakura-chan and Karen-chan might like those, I think. Not sure about the others though. You got everything you need already? Jiraiya asked, getting back on topic. No need for spare kunai, sealing scrolls, things like that? It's important to be prepared, even if the mission is simple. Yeah, I got everything. He rolled up the mission scroll and set it down before going over to where his flak jacket was and opening the pouches. See, I packed them into the scrolls ahead of time, since I don't know when I'll be called into action. Jiraiya took a look at the scrolls in the jacket pockets. Because they were small, the scrolls in question were only able to store a few things in comparison to a larger scroll. Space and volume mattered when it came to the subject of storage, as well as the formula depending on what was to be the contents of the script. You wouldn't use the same formula to store water as you would your equipment. I'd suggest not having everything put away in a scroll, Jiraiya advised him, after checking over his equipment. The time it takes for you get them out can be fatal. But other than that, you're good to go. Then he rose to his feet. He had to be on his way after all. Once I get back we'll stop by the sealing R&D and then go out to celebrate your mission success and talk about your father. Do a good job and listen to your seniors on the mission, you might learn something. Yeah, I know, Naruto said. See you when you get back. Sasuke home. Sasuke arrived at home later that evening, after training. His mind hurt more than his body, a mental fatigue that made his brain pulse within his skull. It was an unpleasant feeling in a different way than he was used to, and he took poorly to the fact that Kakashi's single eye had managed to get him to do something as outrageous as balancing a scroll on his nose like he was some kind of trained animal. True to his word, Kakashi had begun teaching him the use of his Sharingan to a greater degree. And he was starting with the use of the eye of hypnotism aspect that he utilized on Zabuza, working on the ability to inflict subtle suggestions that can influence an opponent. Or outright control them, if the user was skilled enough, as Kakashi had proven. The eyes acted as a lens in that case, but there was a subtle art to it that didn't come easily to Sasuke as the eye of insight aspect did. He would actually rather work on reading techniques and learning to mold his chakra to the appropriate affinity so that he could utilize it, expanding his arsenal to new heights. But Kakashi, the man known to have copied over 1,000 techniques, refused on the notion that ironing out the flaws in his suggestibility and shoring up his ability to handle genjutsu would be more important in the long run. Sasuke begrudgingly had to agree with him there, more so after he showed him the photo he took of the previous mentioned balancing act, which Sasuke promptly burned to ashes. Of course, no matter how hard his head was pounding, he immediately flung a kunai on reflex the moment that he sensed a presence that didn't belong in his home. The sharpened point disappeared with a meaty sound and then a wooden thunk going through the body and pinning itself into the floorboards beneath it. He turned on the light afterwards to find that it was merely an albino snake, with the kunai having pierced it through the skull for an instant kill. At least, he thought it was an instant kill before the flesh began to bulge and then slink from the rear towards the wound made by the kunai, where a smaller snake broke through it and then slithered out. It was decidedly creepy, even by his standards. He readied another kunai just for the revulsion factor. Only the sound of a familiar voice stopped him from throwing it. I would appreciate it if you didn't slay my relay serpents, Sasuke-kun. They are quite difficult to produce. "You're Kabuto, aren't you?" he asked, to which the serpent bobbed its head. Sasuke couldn't help but scowl. "What are you doing in my home?" "My apologies. However, I wished to discreetly contact you, and it was the most efficient method that I could use." The serpent's beady red eyes looked him up and down before fixing its gaze on where his seal was located. "I have come to collect you so that we can advance the cursed seal that Lord Orochimaru gifted you." There was a mild pulsing sensation from the cursed seal upon hearing that, held in place by the sealing script around it like a ring of thorns turned inwards. Sasuke brought his hand up to it before giving his answer. "I refuse." Somehow the serpent managed to display what amounted to a surprised expression before compassing itself and asking a simple question. "Are you giving up on the power of the cursed seal?" "I have no intention of doing that." After all, he needed every advantage he could get if he was taking out Itachi in the future. The cursed seal's power was a secondary source of chakra, a booster that could heighten his physical strength, stamina, reflexes, and more. The battle against Gaara proved that much. However, two things stopped him from accepting his offer. The first was, as mentioned before, he needed to learn to use his eyes properly. "The only one who can teach me to use a Sharingan is someone who has one, and that's Kakashi. No matter what power I gain from the cursed seal, it won't replace being able to properly learn how to use the Sharingan from someone who has it. So until I've learned everything that he's capable of teaching me, I won't budge on that." The second thing was that he didn't trust Kabuto as far as he could throw him. Not for a second. The man had managed to deceive them at the Chunin exams, and the fact that he'd done so easily enough to sucker all of Team 7 made him wary of whatever the spy had planned for him. "And then there's the fact that one who gave me this mark is dead," Sasuke added. "He tried to take out the Hokage and failed, so what good will learning from you have in the end?" The snake stared at him in a pensive silence after that declaration. Then it rose up slightly. "I see. So, you place the value of strength on being able to surpass one's enemies, and there is no meaning in learning from one weaker than another in your presence, is that right?" "Yeah, that's right." The snake began to chuckle. "Then by that standard, there is no one greater than Lord Orochimaru, and no one more suitable to teach you what you desire than him. For you see, Sasuke-kun, Lord Orochimaru has surpassed an enemy greater than the Hokage or the village, or even your brother. He has surpassed death itself, thus he is by all accounts the strongest individual in this world." Sasuke found himself contemplating his words and what to weight of them. Kabuto actually sounded like he believed that to be possible, but dead was dead. He'd seen enough of his clansmen fall that fateful night to know that much. "You're insane if you actually believe that." The snake shook its head. "He may have lost this skirmish with the Hokage due to the Toad Sannin appearing, but he is immortal and can merely attempt again after learning from his mistakes, so what of value was lost? I shall prove it to you in due time, Sasuke-kun." Sasuke took a step back as the snake suddenly set itself ablaze. The emerald flame was unnatural, bursting from the scales to slowly devour itself and the serpent corpse that it emerged from. The final parting words that it uttered left a chill running down even his spine. "The next one to contact you will be Lord Orochimaru himself. Take in as much knowledge and training that you can and become a pupil worthy of Lord Orochimaru's tutelage by then, because once things begin there will be no turning back." The snake vanished entirely after that. It didn't even leave ashes behind, making Sasuke question just what was the point in doing that if they were so hard to make in the first place. That guy made no sense. He stared at the spot a moment longer before activating his Sharingan to ensure there was no other chakra signatures within his household before he rubbed the sealed cursed mark on his neck that settled down. Orochimaru base. "I must admit, that hadn't gone as well as planned," Kabuto noted as the medium he used to speak and see through the serpent went inert. He was in a base that was in a secure location far from prying eyes and unknown to all but a few, aside from the test subjects squared away. He had to chide himself for the momentary lack of composure after the plan went off rails, but he supposed it couldn't be helped in the end. The original plan had been to have Sasuke sign a contract with the snakes and then use that to reverse summon him out of the leaf without anyone being able to track him down. From there he would use him to revive Orochimaru from his seal and then use him as a vessel. It would have been the perfect recovery in the end, denying the leaf one of its assets and ensuring the Sharingan for his master. He'd have the perfect body, the perfect eyes, and with the land of sound being brought to heel, it would have been as though nothing had happened. However, Sasuke's wariness put a delay in that plan. Oh, it was a minor setback in the grand scheme of things, as long as he desired power and would eventually come around. In fact, it might be better in the end if his body was allowed to mature and his chakra reserves to fill out as well. Still, that left the matter of reviving him through Plan B with the other candidate in Leaf that would serve for that purpose. Considering that Anko was currently watching Karen, it would be two birds with one stone, reclaiming both the young women that had abandoned his service and putting them to use. The only real question was merely how to lure them both out of the village at a suitable time and location. Tapping his fingers on the desk for a moment as he formulated a plan, while going over some of Orochimaru's other projects that could be of use, a smirk came across his face. It would do just fine. Let's get the greatest prison break in the Hidden Leaf's history started. End of Chapter 33. Chapter 34. The Konoha Strict Correction Facility was used to house criminals of the Leaf that committed treasonous acts or murders, the worst among the worst, that didn't warrant a sentence to Hazuki Castle or execution. During the current time of peace, the number of criminals was minimal, and so the facility was downsized and placed within a volcano. There, the prisoners' chakra was devoted solely to keeping the heat from overwhelming them as they tilled the soil futilely. Of course, in the wake of the invasion, the smaller size meant that the addition of the sand captives led to a serious overpopulation problem. The cells that could fit 2 to 4 prisoners easily were now cramped, housing 5 to 8 each, with former Leaf prisoners being placed in one set and captives in the others to prevent any unnecessary casualties among the two. Needless to say, none of them were happy. So you have a single facility filled with trained killers that lost their leader, lost their war, and were stuffed into overcrowded prison cells nestled within a volcano. How much havoc could they cause in a short time if they all got loose and scattered about, taking their revenge against a land of fire as a whole? How much manpower would it take to bring them all to heel? That was the question that came to the minds of the Anbu and Medical Corps shinobi midday as they looked over the battlefield that the correctional facility devolved into sometime during the night, when their guard was at its the lowest due to the majority of the prisoners being asleep and behind bars. They'd only received notice something was wrong when the shinobi that came to change their shift arrived to find corpses strewn about. Some were impaled by golden arrows and kunai, others were withered husks. The watchtower was filled with bodies that had been crushed by blunt force, and some looked like they had numerous bite marks from razor-sharp fangs. The equipment used to contact the village itself was sabotaged upon inspection, so even if they had tried to, they couldn't have alerted the village before the change in shifts. They dispatched a team to send word to the Hokage personally, unable to trust that a message would make it without being intercepted any other way. The rest combed the prison for any survivors to explain what happened and who was responsible for this. There were none to be found. Anko House. In the village proper, Anko found herself staring down at the golden chain of chakra in her charge's hands with a raised brow. It wasn't very thick and was roughly the width of a finger, with each link being smaller than that. And it just came out when you tried to do the chakra string exercise? The girl, at least, looked as confused as Anko did as the length of the chain increased. I followed the instructions, focusing on sending my chakra out as densely as I can and to maintain it a straight, condensed form. It hurt the first time, since my Tenketsu aren't used to trying to force chakra that dense out, but it turns out like this every other time. You're really just full of surprises. She grabbed the length of chain between both her hands and pulled it a few times to test how durable it is. Well, it's fairly tangible, but I wonder how it stands up against someone with chakra? Tightening her grasp, Anko channeled chakra into her hands to strengthen them and felt nothing. Her hands were numb compared to rest of her body until she released the chains. Only then could she feel it flowing back into her hands. It interfered with my ability to use chakra just from touching it. Karen grabbed the chain and started fiddling around with it in curiosity upon hearing that, wrapping it around her wrist. I don't feel anything different. Then again, it wouldn't make much sense for something made from my own chakra to suppress itself. Maybe it only works on foreign chakra then? Anko's thoughts were racing on the implications of this and what sort of other effects it could have. Would the effect increase with the size of the chains? Would it work on different types of chakra? And more importantly, did the Hokage know about it, given that it was part of his guidelines that she underwent training in using chakra strings? I think I should go tell the Hokage about this. It seems like something he'd want to know, HM. She trailed off as there was a knock on their home door. Opening it revealed an Anbu officer with a scroll in hand. She took the scroll and looked it over as the deliverer vanished, and her expression turned to a frown. Gear up. We leave out in 5 minutes. The sudden change in her tone caused the younger Kunoichi to look up from the chain that she had formed into a seamless loop by connecting the ends, causing the chakra compassing it to meld together. Is something wrong? There was a massive prison breakout, so they're calling in every shinobi that's capable of tracking and sensing and assigning them to different sectors that they've divided the land of fire into before the inmates can cause problems that reflect on the village or try something stupid. She looked up from the scroll towards Karen with a stern glance. You remember what I told you about being out on assignments, right? I do, Karen said, letting the chain dissipate. But if I haven't encountered their chakra before, then I won't recognize whether or not I should be looking for them. All I can do is point out if they have chakra or not. That's fine. Any questioning or fighting will be done by the Anbu accompanying us, while I'll be watching your back to make sure nothing happens to you if it does come down to a fight. We're going to be moving around a lot since you've got decent range on your sensing ability, so you need to focus on not missing anything if you can help it, got it? Yes, ma'am. Naruto POV. Sorry about this, Naruto said with his hands clasped together, as though to offer a prayer to the honey badger roughly 3 times his size that laid before him in a lifeless heap. He couldn't say he was fond of the vicious bear-sized creature, but he still didn't exactly enjoy having to kill it. But that was the mission he and a pair of other Chunin, Hayes and Akei, had taken. While they had arrived earlier that morning in the land of honey, the trip had been something of an awkward affair since his partners were roughly twice his age. But they were pretty straightforward with explaining how they operated on this sort of mission, having done it a number of times before. They marked a map he had of the local area with spots that the big ones usually nested in and decided that they would split up to cover all of them as quickly as possible once night fell. One more to go, Naruto said with a sigh as he finished enclosing the corpse in a sealing scroll that Akei had given him. The Chunin was apparently familiar with a variety of sealing formulas, as proven when Naruto asked him a question about it. He immediately regretted it when he ended up having to listen to an hour-long speech about the difference in the formulas and how they affected the containment, preservation, ejection velocity, etc. On the plus side, now he knew how to make a simplified single-item storage formula that could fit on a sheet of paper the size of a business card. He used them to keep his masks sealed in separate sheets with their names on each one in his pouch. That made carrying them around much easier since he didn't have to rummage around in his storage scroll for them. Setting out to the next spot marked on the map, searching for any trails that would lead him to the last target, Naruto came to a stop when he heard a strange sound cutting through the air from behind him. He turned around and squinted his eyes, only to register what it was only a second later. Whoa! He jumped upwards as an oversized shuriken whizzed by where he had stood and wedged itself into a tree. It was an unmistakable attack against him. Landing in a crouch, Naruto turned in the direction that it came from as he reached for his kunai pouch. Who's there? Take a guess, a familiar voice whispered from behind him. It can't be. He turned around to see the stretching limb and spread fingers flying forward from the ground, but too late to react as it struck. The fingers of the stretching hand closed around his neck and carried him several meters across from his landing spot into the trunk of a tree. The impact wrenched the kunai from his hand, and a pained cry suffocated in his throat as his consciousness flickered upon hitting the back of his head against the tree. GRKK. I can't tell you how long I've wanted to do this. A figure emerged from the ground seamlessly. I've had dreams about squeezing the life out you, nine-tailed brat. Naruto's quickening pulse skyrocketed as he laid eyes on the man who had betrayed his trust, revealed the secret hidden from him, hurt Iruka, and tried to kill him. He was far more muscular and broader than Naruto remembered, stripes lining the muscular frame at certain points and eyes narrowed into slits. But it was him, no doubt. A snarl bubbled up in his throat as the name forced itself out through his gritted his teeth. Me, Zu, Kit. Glad you remember me, he said, tightening his grasp to cut off Naruto's windpipe. The boy frantically tried to wedge his fingers between his neck and the broad fingers slowly strangling him to death. Because I haven't forgotten how you ruined my life. You ruined it yourself. Naruto gathered chakra into his hand and fingers, bleeding it through the tenketsu, and then repeated the training steps he used to cut through leaves to sharpen the chakra. The rushed and desperate act resulted in cutting into both his fingers and the set around his throat. The flexible hand retreated, blood running from the gouges from where the sharpened wind chakra parted Mizuki's flesh. So they taught you some new tricks, huh? How did you get out of prison? Naruto panted, working to level out his breathing as he picked up the kunai and held in a defensive position. The dull throb in the back of his head, the hot blood that ran from his hands where he'd cut himself in haste, the bruised flesh around his neck, all the pain he was in slowly fell to the back of his mind as he stared at the man in front of him. And what did they feed you in there? Like my new look? He tightened his fist to flex the muscles in his arms. This body is the result of the power bestowed upon me by the knowledge of Lord Orochimaru. The snake guy is dead, Naruto said. The old man made sure of that. Believe that if you want. It doesn't matter. What does matter is that when I was sprung from prison, one of his men gave me what I needed to attain this power in exchange for doing them a little favor first. So you and I are going on a little trip after I've worked out my frustration, of course. It wasn't hard to guess who it was that gave Mizuki whatever power he was going on about and wanted Naruto brought alive. There was only one person alive that would do both while flying under Orochimaru's banner. The moment that Naruto came to that conclusion, the air grew tense. A feeling of anger blossomed in his chest, and the cuts on his fingers sizzled softly as they healed over in a prelude to what was to come. That bastard Kabuto is behind this, isn't he? A slight chuckle left Mizuki's lips at seeing the anger becoming tangible in his visage. Confident in his own newfound power, he didn't fear it. I wish Iruka could see that look on your face right now. Even he couldn't confuse it for anything less than that of a monster. Tell me where he is. Naruto ordered, feeling the same anger that beckoned his tailed beast cloak in his voice, which no doubt reflected on his face. He hadn't forgotten how Kabuto had been the one to activate that seal that ended up causing Karen pain. Nor did he forget how she'd nearly blown herself up to try and take him out. Just remembering it was enough to get his blood boiling, and it was only the memory of the sort of monster he'd became and nearly killing Sakura that stopped him from reaching out for that power to tear the location out of Mizuki's flapping lips that instant. Mizuki extended his hand, palm facing up, as though offering it. Don't worry, I intend to take you there personally. But first, I want to test out my power against that of the demon fox. The two glared at one another with clear hostility that mounted with the looming silence as one attempted to restrain himself and the other urged the change while drunk on his newfound power. Only the distant crashing sound reverberating through the trees broke the tension. The rational part of Naruto latched onto it and recalled that was where the other two Chunin had gone off to finish their mission, likely to be victims of a rampage should he lose control. I brought two friends of mine along with me, Mizuki said, following his side glance. That sound you hear is them tearing your comrades apart. They had poor luck taking a mission with you. Then I don't have time to waste playing with you, Naruto said as he made the cross seal. Shadow clones popped into existence and surrounded him. Two of them broke from the group to follow the distant sound of destruction and search for his teammates. The rest swarmed Mizuki like a tidal wave. The sight only served to put a smirk on Mizuki's face that bared his fangs. Then he exploded into motion, fast enough that Naruto barely registered as the memories of the clones in front of him popped half a second before the man was in front of him with his fist cocked back. The world blurred as one of the clones pulled a substitution and took his place. That was close, Naruto thought as his mind caught up with the swap. He was faster than Naruto had predicted, and if the clones didn't have some ability to make their own judgment it would have gone poorly. The rest of the clones tried to swarm him again, only for Mizuki to bat them aside until he spotted the sole one standing still and moved as quickly as before, likely pegging him as the original. Naruto's instinct screamed for him to use a substitution the moment he lost sight of him. It proved to be the right call as he received the memories of the deceased clone afterwards. It's only a matter of time before he catches me. I'm going to need to deal with his speed and finish this quick. Naruto went over his options in the span of a second as he swapped places again. Getting Byako out of the ceiling slip and mask would take 3 seconds at the least. That sort of time wasn't an option, while Mizuki could close the distance at the obvious tell. Not to mention, if he was in touch with Kabuto, he'd likely been informed about Byako and has a countermeasure ready. So that leaves something he can't know about. Naruto had already exposed he could use wind chakra, so that was out. That left the Rasengan and the thing he was working on before he left the village. The former could likely end the fight in a single blow, but Mizuki was fast enough that Naruto was struggling to keep track of him. The latter could probably surpass Mizuki in terms of speed, but it took time to convert enough yang chakra for it to manifest properly and last for more than a minute. As long as I can stop him from moving, they both should be able to work though, Naruto decided as another set of clones disappeared between a swap. An idea came to mind, though he wasn't a fan of it. As long it works, it'll be worth a hit or two. He created 10 more clones, giving the appearance that he was trying to pad out his losses. Each of them was instilled with the plan as they pulled from his thoughts on creation. One dispersed immediately, spreading that knowledge to the surviving clones which acted it out. Naruto threw himself forward and swapped places with a clone, leaving it to scatter along with 5 others. Mizuki took note of their departure and made to give chase after them, suspecting that he was one of them. Naruto used that opportunity to fling explosive tagged kunai at the 6 in a spread shot since he didn't know which one Mizuki would go after. At the same time, he felt a pair of clones raiding his pouch from behind for the concussive tags he had there. 6 explosions rang out, stopping short of the clones as they used the foresight to escape the blast radius with a well-timed burst of chakra from their legs. Mizuki, with his clothing scorched from the proximity of the blast but otherwise unharmed, immediately wheeled around to try and strike down the one that threw it. A substitution put Naruto out of range as one of the tagged clones took his place and was dispersed by the blow, resulting in a chain detonation as Naruto used a body flicker at the last moment to get clear. The shockwaves from the explosions threw up a dirt and dust veil. Memories of the clones that were sacrificed flooded Naruto's mind as what remained of their chakra spread to the rest. The surprised look on Mizuki's face at the last moment left him wanting to believe that it was over and that his extra measures were unnecessary. That belief was summarily crushed as Mizuki abruptly shot of the ground like he was breaking the surface of water. The man was slightly injured and furious, that much was clear as he lashed out with the back of his fist. It connected with Naruto's head and pain bloomed where the blow had caught him before he hit the uneven ground with a loud thud. A haggard breath left Naruto's mouth as his sight returned just in time for him to see Mizuki's foot descended to stomp on his chest. Even with chakra flooding his body in reflex to the impending blow, the force still jostled through his body as it passed through. The ground caved in around him as he let loose a pained cry padded out with blood. Ah! The sound etched a cruel smile onto Mizuki's face. He was reveling in the superiority of the moment, intent on drawing it out as he pressed down. The Leafs' standards must have really fallen since I got locked up if someone like you made Chunin because of a few cheap tricks. That you fell for, Naruto said with a wheeze as a set of memories suddenly flooded his mind. One of the 6 that he had dispatched earlier was watching the scene unfold and dispersed to signal the counterattack. He used his hands to brace Mizuki's leg and then anchored himself to the ground with chakra to hold him in place as clones broke through the surrounding brush from the 4 cardinal directions. The biggest issue was that Mizuki was too fast to properly hit. But he wasn't like Neji, whose eyes let him peer through a trap or had that spinning defense that took him by surprise. A textbook ambush would work just fine once he could no longer evade by sinking into the earth or jumping away, which was accomplished by baiting Mizuki at the expense of taking a hit, even if it was sooner than planned. Being attacked by all 4 directions with only 2 hands and 1 leg free, Mizuki could possibly fend off 3 of the 4 attacking him now. The 4th would hit no matter what. Between all of them carrying kunai laced with wind chakra, each and every one of them could cut him down. You think this is enough to take me down? Mizuki, angered at the thought of being outmaneuvered, lashed out while caught between the 4-pronged attack. He brought his other foot up, placing all his weight onto the original's chest to catch the one attacking him from the front. His left hand turned into a fist that he brought down with all the might he could manage to smash in the head of the one attacking the left. Reaching for his oversized shuriken that fit just right in his other hand, he swung it to cut the 3rd one down. That left his rear exposed to the last one. The clone was positioned perfectly to drive it into his unprotected back, at least that was what should have happened. Instead, there was a loud popping sound as Mizuki's right arm turned boneless from all the joints dislocating. The limp arm still holding the large shuriken stretched around like a living serpent, guided by his chakra. It promptly cleaved the clone's head in half, causing it to disperse along with the technique. Certain of his victory, Mizuki grinned down at the younger shinobi, and his lips moved to gloat, only to be promptly thrown off so abruptly that he was in the air and spinning before he realized it. Righting himself and landing in a crouch, his confusion only served to grow in the face of the boy rising to his feet while wreathed in a thin yellow aura like sunlight-given form that bled from his skin. The timing was too close, Naruto thought as he looked down at his hands and body in disappointment. The death of the 4th clone served as the trigger for the 5th, which had devoted itself to converting all the chakra it possessed into yang chakra as quickly as it could. To dispel itself as a next to last resort. The net result was supposed to be a sudden influx that flooded his limbs with vigor, threaded his muscles with strength, sharpened his senses and reflexes, and numbed the pain as his body healed at a heightened rate, but Mizuki catching him with that kick too soon and fending off the fourth clone like that cut it short. That must be the power of the nine-tailed fox, right? Mizuki asked, regaining his composure after being surprised. He mentioned you could do something like that, but I was expecting more. Naruto shook his head. True enough, it was based off his time spent while wreathed in the nine-tailed fox's power while trying to kill Kabuto. That strength and speed were when he was at his strongest to date, but that sea of anger and murderous desire robbed him of reason. So he took Jiraiya's advice and the training that he'd went through with Karen and Sakura to form a means of reaching a similar state without the corrupted and malevolent influence. His own chakra reserves could be used to attain a similar form. He'd practiced and ended up running into a tree as a result to confirm it. But in this case it was both rushed and divided by a third due to the existing clones seeking his teammates, so he couldn't even form a chakra arm or make another clone because it would spread the yang chakra too thin to reach a heightened state. But it's good enough like this against him, Naruto concluded as he stared up at Mizuki and clenched his fists. You should be grateful that I'm in this state instead of using the fox's power like I planned as my last resort. Oh, and why's that? He lunged for Naruto with abnormal speed at the final word to try and catch him off guard. Yet his charge was met with a cross counter as Naruto's fist greeted his face eagerly. Mizuki was then sent crashing through a tree a few meters behind as a result. Because I would have torn you limb from limb already, Naruto finished. And if I do that, I can't get answers from you. So let's wrap this up and you tell me where exactly Kabuto wanted you to bring me, okay? End of chapter 34.